encourage them to jump over and watch that too. So yeah, thanks again to everyone for joining us. I am James Crossley. I'm the general manager of Madison Books here in Seattle, Washington. And we are the sponsors, along with our friends at Paulina Springs Books in Sisters, Oregon, and Country Bookshelf in Bozeman, Montana, of the Books in Common author event series. Tonight, Jason Diamon is here with us, and Andi Zeisler, and we're gonna have a great conversation with them. I will remind you a couple of the things. First of all, there's a button down there at the bottom of your screen with little speech balloons in it. That's where you can throw in your comments and questions for our authors. Please feel free to do that along the way. We'll be watching that and share those questions with them. Bear in mind that this is a shared creative space for the benefit of all, so please no offensive or immoderate, well, immoderate is okay. I think immoderate is okay. Comments, but we will be booting people who do not meet civic standards. We will be also throwing into the chat links to the Books in Common webpage for this event. Oh, look, there's one now. And the key element on that link is the logos of the sponsoring bookstores. That's where you can purchase the books written by these fine writers. Please go do that. We'll wait here for a minute while you do. Okay, just kidding. But no, do that. Feel free to do that along the way. I guess that's all I wanted to say about that. So I'll tell you a thing or two about the writers we have with us tonight. Jason Diamon, first of all, who was born in Skokie, Illinois, and grew up in the Chicagoland area, but moved to New York in his early 20s. He has worked as a barista, a server, a fry cook, a bookseller, and a DJ. He was the editor of the Jewish pop culture website Juicy.com, the literary editor at flavorwire.com, a former associate editor at Men's Journal, and a former culture and sports editor at Rolling Stone. His memoir, Searching for John Hughes, was released in November 2016, a book that's near and dear to my heart, as John Hughes's movies are. And his most recent book is The Sprawl, released by Coffee House Press just last month. Jason is a Cancer, the astrological sign, not a figurative conversation killer or anything like that.
Some would argue.
He now lives in Brooklyn with his wife, 2 cats, and a dog who we were just discussing before you all joined us, named Max. Also with us tonight is Andi Zeisler, a writer, editor, and cultural critic who is the co-founder of Bitch Media, the nonprofit best known for publishing the award-winning quarterly magazine Bitch, Feminist Response to Pop Culture, which has over 50,000 subscribers. Zeisler is the author of We Were Feminists Once, From Riot Girl to Cover Girl, The Buying and Selling of a Political Movement, Feminism and Pop Culture, and the co-editor of Bitch Fest, 10 Years of Cultural Criticism from the Pages of Bitch Magazine. Her writing on feminism, popular culture, and media has appeared in newspapers and magazines, including Ms., Mother Jones, Bust, the San Francisco Chronicle, the Los Angeles Review of Books, and the Washington Post. She is a regular columnist for Salon and is currently working on a book about how media and pop culture have transformed feminism from a social movement into a personal and brand identity.
That's actually my old title.
Oh, okay.
Just so you know.
Now you're an astronaut.
Yeah. Also, I'm a Sagittarius, if that matters.
Oh, good. Me too. Take that, Jason.
I like Sagittariuses. I mean, I'm a Cancer. I kind of have to like feel something about everybody, at least, I guess. I have feelings for.
Well, I'm going to disappear for a little bit and just listen in on you guys, and I will pop back up later to help feed the questions that you, the audience, share with these authors to them. So I will check out now and see you guys a little later.
Cool. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Hi, Andi.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing okay. How are you? How are things out there?
Yeah, how is anyone, I think. I mean, they have upgraded our air quality from hazardous to very unhealthy, which seems like a really small distinction, but I'm gonna take it. Yeah.
It's just you got all the plants behind you and it actually looks like, I'm like, oh, it looks so nice there. But then I'm like, no, it's probably a hellscape outside.
I mean, my plants have thrived during the pandemic just because I'm home all the time and I can spoil them. But no, they're absolutely hating the air. Anyway, so I was thinking about this, and the first time I think we ever interacted online was when we were both in the suburbs, because I was visiting one of my brothers who lives in West Hartford, Connecticut, and you were in Avon. And I think I must have posted something on Instagram that was, geotagged.
Yeah.
That it was so funny because it was like, we're both in the suburbs.
Yeah. I'm always trying to get people, whenever I'm out there, if I see anybody is like within like a 50-mile radius, I'm like, come hang out with me, please. Let's go to the Chili's or something.
Yeah, well, next time I definitely will, because there's not a lot to do in West Hartford. It's a very, it's an interesting place. But, I'm also a child of the suburbs. I grew up in Scarsdale, New York.
Oh, yeah.
So I think Skokie and Scarsdale have quite a few things in common in a lot of ways.
I say that a lot. I was actually just there last week, and I was like, it's so familiar to me whenever I go there. It's really funny because, I mean, most of the Chicagoland area wanted to look like New England, or I don't want to say upstate, Westchester. I always say, I start saying upstate New York when it's Westchester, but it's kind of funny to me.
People who live in New York City, that is upstate.
Yeah, I know.
That's considered upstate. But so I was really looking forward to this book because I remember thinking that when I was reading Searching for John Hughes, that you really captured something about your experience as like a sort of preteen and teenager in the suburbs, that it was something I couldn't put my finger on, but then reading this, it was sort of clarified, which is that, we see cities as a place where we can sort of act upon them and make ourselves part of them. But the suburbs, I think we think of as sort of acting upon us in ways that we can't control. Do you want to, I don't know, does that sound right to you, or?
Yeah, I mean, something that I've been really grappling with a lot, it was something that I was like kind of really coming up with as I was writing this, like the thing that kind of kept sticking with me is that I think, I mean, maybe this is just like where I like the scene I come from, or like what I read growing up, but I just hate, this is gonna sound like I feel like a Fugazi song or something, but I hate product. I hate like just something being there for the sake of being sold. And America, the last 70 years, I think America has just made so much stuff that we could just throw away. And there's a lot that I love about the suburbs, but what I really came away with was there's a lot that could just be thrown away. Like you could just, like it could just be built, and whoever built it could just move on. And the people that live there just live in a house and on a cul-de-sac or in a subdivision or whatever. And it's just there. And, people like us who grew up in these suburbs, like Generation X, millennials, especially, I think Gen Z is kind of a little bit more mixed because a lot of them are in the cities also. I think this was something that was kind of thrust upon us, and we've, had to find our ways through these like weird places. And there's something kind of great about that if you can make it. Some people can't, and I understand that. But, I think my suburban upbringing made me pretty much everything I am today. And I'm pretty thankful for that.
Yeah. It's interesting because I feel like there's kind of a duality to the way we see the suburbs sort of as a whole, and it's very tied to age. Like, there's the radicalizing aspect is like, the disaffected teen who grows up there and is all of a sudden discovers like, Fugazi and punk and all these things, and is like, I can't wait to get out of these homogenous suburbs. But then there's like, the idea of the heterosexual married couple who they have kids, they're in the city, they outgrow their apartment, they move from the city to the suburb, they realize they're trapped, and then all of a sudden they're living in a, you know, Rick Moody or a John Cheever story.
Yeah.
So I think it's kind of a weird, like there's no, there's sort of no in between in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I mean, there's not a lot of room to move around. You know, that's kind of the funny thing. It's like there's not a lot of room to move around if you don't have ways to. Like if you don't have a driver's license, you know, you're pretty much stuck until you can meet people who do. And then if you do have a driver's license in a car, it's, you know, you can get out, but where are you going to go? You're going to have to turn around and go back home. And if you're unhappy with that, you know, that's the kind of the thing that I kept trying to draw out of a lot of the literature and a lot of the movies that I was that I talk about in the book. It's that if you're not ready for this, if you're not ready for that kind of life, it could be it's very isolating. Cities are isolating. Cities are lonely in their own way. You know, I wrote about Olivia Lang's book. Why is it totally? It's down here. Oh, The Lonely City. Duh. You know, and she did a great job of taking people, famous people like Andy Warhol or Edward Hopper, and like, you know, talking about their lives in the city and how they worked with loneliness to make what they help them create. And I started really thinking about that a lot. And I'm like, you know, I don't think we've given enough credit to just how much that kind of loneliness and isolation has helped people from the suburbs create.
Yeah, I think that's another duality. It's like people expect, I think, to be lonely in cities.
Mm-hmm.
That sort of comes with the territory, but being alone in the suburbs seems like there's more stigma to it, maybe. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, that was what I loved about it was, as someone who, like, I had a lot of friends, and we did walk everywhere, and we biked everywhere, and we, you know, gathered in people's backyards all the time. But then there was a way in which you could just sort of move into the background and be by yourself in that sort of generative way. And it wasn't even feeling like I don't belong here. It was more like I have my own space. And
Right.
that's something that, I feel like I was really blessed to have. And yeah, and yeah.
When you were in the suburbs, did you ever were you in a band, or did you start any zines or anything like that never made it out of the suburbs?
No, because my mother and I moved into New York City when I was 15. She was from Brooklyn originally. She was like dragged kicking and screaming to the suburbs by my dad after they were married. And, you know, he died when I was pretty young. And then she was like, all right, we're getting out of here.
Yeah.
And, you know, that was fine. I think the suburbs really sort of did a number on her sense of self. So, you know, I don't think I wasn't old enough to really have that. Like, my teen angst in the suburbs is leading to something creative beyond myself, like a band or a zine. But I definitely started, I think, thinking, you know, reading everything and thinking about things and discovering the world outside the suburbs, maybe earlier than I might have had I been in New York City the whole time.
I'm always fascinated by that, because like when somebody tells me like they were in like some ska band in the suburbs that they only played like 2 shows, and I'm always like, man, that's so cool. It's like, I'm glad you're telling me this, that you were in a ska band, one, because I don't know if I would tell anybody that. But 2, it's just like, I'm always kind of, you know, I love kind of like finding like these like archives of stuff, like, oh, you know, like I buy repress records all the time, and it's always like, you know, all these like like all these unknown garage bands or all these unknown post-punk bands from like Northern England or something. And I'm always kind of fascinated that people are finding these things, and there is an audience of I'm imagining at least like 1,000 or so people who care enough to buy these records. But it always kind of blows my mind. I always ask people this, like, what did you do in the suburbs? Because I feel like there hasn't been enough documentation of this stuff. I mean, there was, but I think there came a certain point where I think there's just a whole generation of weird, cool stuff that was done in the suburbs that might just be lost to time, or people were just embarrassed because it was, you know, their ska band.
Well, that's the other thing, is like a lot of creative people who do come out of the suburbs are not really in a hurry to like disclose that
Right.
about themselves. You know, there are people I knew for years before I knew that they grew up in like a neighboring suburb in Westchester. Right. So there's also that, but yeah. Let's see. Sorry, okay. Well, so I don't want to like, I feel like this has to be said at some point, so I'm just going to say it now. Like the suburbs as a kind of monolith is, you know, that idea is currently sort of being weaponized by Donald Trump as part of his election rhetoric. And it just feels like he took every single cliche and stereotype, even the ones that contradict one another, and just like really dialed up the volume. But you do write about the role, the very, you know, specific role that the suburbs have played in electoral politics. With the, you know, considering that everyone is really, almost everyone is like online and doesn't really necessarily think of themselves as tied to the place they're in. Do you think that the suburbs are still such a crucial sort of flashpoint of ideology?
Yes and no. I mean, I think it's really, I've always cautioned myself because I hate politics. So I never want to be one of these people who's like, oh, it's very interesting. Because when you say that's interesting about politics, you are negating the fact that people's lives are usually on the line. So I always kind of am a little apprehensive, but I do, since I've been kind of immersed in this for the last few years, it is kind of interesting to me because, you know, even before Trump started using this rhetoric, I was really curious as to how much people saw themselves in the suburbs, or how much people saw the suburbs in them, you know, like how suburban people consider themselves. Because you know, it's 2020 and I'm still saying, like, you know, people are connected, people could get online and they can read about it, you know, obviously everybody knows that, but I sometimes wonder if Trump does realize that. Like I just think, I don't know. I mean, it's so hard for me to say with what happened in 2016 and what's happening now, but I do see him using a very, what seems to me to be a very dated idea of the suburbs. But I also, you know, I say this as a Jewish person, and I talk to Black friends, and I talk to friends of whose parents are immigrants, and everybody from all of our groups, women know this, LGBTQ people know this. There's always going to be a dog whistle. Like you're waiting for a dog whistle. And to me, the suburbs, when he talks about the suburbs and he talks about the suburban way of life, he's talking about white people, middle-class white people.
Yeah. He's talking about a blip that was like historically an incredibly short period of time.
Yeah.
You know, what everyone thinks of when they think of that sort of idealized Pleasantville 50s thing that, you know, the Republicans really want to get us back to. It's something that's, you know, sort of historically insignificant, but culturally just looms.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm old enough to remember, just old enough to remember Reagan, and like the idea that Reagan was trying to, the Main Street USA thing, you know, the shining city on the hill.
Right.
You know,
More in America. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. And that's so far gone. Like, most people didn't experience that, and but people experienced the suburbs. And I say in the book, like, the suburbs, I'm not one of these people who I don't bash generations, but I do look at the suburbs as something that was given to the baby boomer generation as sort of this gift. Like, our generation, our grandparents' generation, they either came here from another country, or they came from the cities, or they came from urban or rural areas, and they had this opportunity to live this kind of easier life. And it's easy to just bash, like, people to be like, oh, you grew up with all this ease, but the suburbs for a good 20 years, you're right, it's a blip. I mean, the suburban way of life, the facade crumbled really fast. People started moving into places like Levittown right after the war. And when did Shirley Jackson start writing short stories that were already critiquing the suburbs?
Yeah, exactly.
It then by the 70s, especially with like Generation X, there's a lot of very anti-suburban sentiments that you could just kind of pick up in anything from watching Repo Man, which is something I do like once a year for some reason.
Same.
To like, just any book, like any books you pick up, when people go back to the suburbs in a book, from the 80s or 90s, it's, this harrowing, terrible thing. So there was obviously some trauma there. Like, I don't know, I couldn't really pick up. I can't play like psychologist to an entire generation, but Generation X really ushered in the sort of suburban malaise, sort of picking apart the suburbs, and we haven't looked back since. We've just been picking it apart and drawing out everything since. And
I kind of wonder if that had to do with the way that pop culture began sort of picking apart the suburbs and like looking at the sort of seedy underbelly. Like, I always think about like after school specials, which were always set in the suburbs. And they were always like, okay, it's, this 12-year-old boy comes home every day and starts drinking, or like,
right.
This girl takes, acid one time and just absolutely freaks out and, with the dog in the microwave or something like that. So I think the pop culture that Generation X and, maybe older millennials grew up with was it painted the suburbs as this big lie that our parents had been sold. And that there was all the things that weren't supposed to happen were happening more than anyone knew, Yeah,
but then it's really funny because, like, on the flip side, I was watching, like, Weird Science came on a few weeks ago, and I was noticing the part where they go into the city, and it's like it's all like blues music and like smoky rooms and like black people, and then there's like the one white dude is like the sort of like it's the guy who plays the janitor in The Breakfast Club. So he's like kind of like vaguely maybe like European looking, like, immigrant looking.
Right. He's also the bohunk from 16 Candles.
Right, he's the bohunk, which if you grew up in the Midwest, like bohunk, even when I was a kid, was a term you still heard, and you knew that just meant he might speak English, but he's not American. He's right. It was such a weird term, but it's like, on the flip side, like, you also would, when you'd see the city portrayed in pop culture, it was always like flaming trash cans and gangs with knives chasing you down the street. It was like you couldn't win, but that's been a lot of weird. I think we've all been kind of scarred by watching too many movies.
Well, that's probably true. And I do want to get back to pop culture later, but I'm curious, what was something that surprised you that you found out while you were working on this book? Or was there anything, I guess?
No, there was a lot of things, but I think one of the things that, pop culture wise, and I won't dig too deep into that, was just how obsessed with metaphors we are. I think America is just obsessed with metaphors. Like so many of the movies we've made and books we've written, there's just, even if we don't realize it, I mean, I think there was a time when like metaphors were cool, but like, you know, I keep talking about with like Nightmare on Elm Street. I'm like, it's a wild metaphor. Like this is just like, you kill a child molester and then you just act like he wasn't there. And then he comes back and haunts everybody's dreams. It's like, Jesus, that's like a metaphor for the suburbs if I ever, you know, heard one. But, you know, I mean, the thing that I actually don't feel bad. I shouldn't feel bad about this. My shrink tells me I shouldn't feel bad about things. But you know, it's funny because like today Howard Zinn was in the news because Trump did his whole shtick where he's like outlawing the 1619 I don't know, whatever. He's an idiot. But you know, I read Howard Zinn when I was a kid and it changed my life. And I think that, and like a lot of like, you know, anything from like Fugazi to Bikini Kill to Public Enemy to all the bands I listened to, all the stuff that I was weaned on kind of like gave me this really, I don't want to, I guess nuanced isn't the right word, but it made me look at the United States, the United States in one way. Like there's a lot of beauty in this country. There's a lot of really cool things that have happened in America, but there's a ton of lies. There's a ton of stuff that America has just run away from. You know, it's, you know, I said this on Twitter the other day and people were coming after me, but, you know, like, I forget how many young people don't believe the Holocaust was real. And I was like, well, yeah. And I was like, well, to be fair, I mean, Americans have committed several genocides in its history and nobody talks about those.
Well, yeah, we didn't learn about most genocide.
Yeah, right.
We didn't learn about the like foundational genocides in America. I think, you know, the fact that we learned about the Holocaust is not just because it was a terrible genocide, but because it didn't happen here.
Right.
And that's, you know, sort of an easier, that's not as heavy a lift as looking at ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, as the descendant of pretty much a family that was wiped out in the Holocaust, you know, I take that very seriously. But I also take other people's, and I say other people's, I mean like other groups of people's trauma very seriously because I understand in my own way. You know, I've had to deal with it, but I think I always felt guilty for having sort of this like, American exceptionalism is kind of bullshit, you know, like this kind of view. I mean, I love America. I would not be alive if I wasn't here. My family came to America and made their way, and I'm very proud of that. But I think what surprised me, to get back to, was I was surprised that I came away kind of feeling better about my views. I don't know if that's getting older or what, but you know, I'm going to always be a person who challenges what I see as wrong, and I'm always going to be like, you know, I'm always going to try to my best to stand up for, you know, what I believe. But I do think that I always try to be like, you know, America's, it's going to be okay. We're going to do good in the long run. But then I really, you know, I don't believe that. America has done a lot of really bad things. I'd like to see it do better. That's all I'm asking right now. I just want to see it do better at this point, and then move from there. But it's going to take a lot. And I kind of, in this really messed up, dark time in our country's history, I think I was really happy to be able to accept my own thoughts and kind of talk about these things publicly and be like, hey, you know, America needs to accept its shit. It needs to be like, hey, we've screwed up time and time again, and we need to fix these things and we need to get better. And that's
we're not very good. We're not very good at sort of self-examination and reckoning. And there's always this urge to sort of tie everything up in a neat bow. And, you know, I very much appreciated that about this book, is that that was not an intention. That was not something that you were sort of trying to do, but it was more like interrogating the way we talk about the suburbs, the way we sort of reduce them, the way they've been politically weaponized, and the way they should be or should evolve in the midst of, all the various crises that that are going on right now.
Yeah, I mean, I said it in an interview, and I don't mean to always bring up I don't always mean to bring up therapy, but whatever.
You bring it up, yeah.
I said this in an interview, and I'm like, God, I wish I would have actually said that in the book, but it just kind of came to me. And the metaphor, again, metaphors, we love metaphors, but I feel like America is just constantly in therapy and never getting anything out of it. Like, that's really, at the end of the day, like, we need to find a new therapist. I don't know what that is, but yeah.
Well, so, I mean, this book is specifically about American suburbs, and we do see the suburbs as an American invention, but do suburbs sort of occupy that kind of space in other countries? Like, do they have that kind of footprint in the imagination of other countries?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the UK you see it, like in Europe you do. I mean, but when you go on and you look at like the biggest suburbs in the world, I don't think America shows up on that list with technically what's like the biggest suburb in the world. I don't in the top 50, if I'm correct. I could be wrong, but I'd have to check. But it's like, I think technically like Taiwan has the biggest suburban area in the world of like almost 4 million people. Then Tokyo comes on after that. But I don't think I really, and I mean, I can't speak. I have friends in those countries, but I should probably talk to them a little bit more, but I don't think they're as preoccupied with this as we are. The UK, you see people talk about being from the suburbs. The UK, I think the English and their thing with class is so hard for us to really understand if we're not from there. But I do think a lot of people consider the suburbs in the UK, just like, from everything I've gathered, if you live in the suburbs, good for you. That's nice. It's not your posh, but I think I think it kind of plays into their just really weird class stuff that I have honestly had dozens of friends from there try to explain to me, and I still don't get it. But, and all the like the Evil and Wad novels I've read, still don't understand it. But I think America just we're just constantly finding ourselves here. We're trying to understand ourselves. It's so funny. We've been trying to do this for almost closing in on, I mean, not closing in, but 2.5 centuries. America thought it had an idea of what it was, I think, and then it lost it. And I think the suburbs played a part in that idea. Like the suburbs were part of, like, when America thought it was like, we've made it. We are America. We've won the war. We've done all these great things. The suburbs are part of that, and things fell apart. By the 1970s, especially, like, it's like you said. Yeah, I mean, I actually hadn't even thought about that. It's so crazy, just what a blip it was. People called it the American century, but it was really a good 20 years.
Yeah. Oh, totally. It's funny because I feel like, politics was just kind of in the air in the suburbs. And I don't know if it was because, when you're, I don't know. I don't remember exactly the conditions under which the stuff happened, but I just remember becoming aware of, like, the water shortage in the 70s, because that was when, we were told to just turn off the taps while we were brushing our teeth.
Yeah.
Or, Reagan, or the Cold War and the threat of nuclear annihilation, which was, again, something that pop culture presented as something uniquely threatening to the suburbs, as though it's not uniquely threatening to the world.
Right.
But there was this way in which I think I understood the suburbs in their own weird way as inherently like a contested site of politics. And it's interesting to think about.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's really fascinating to watch the suburbs grow up or grow older. I don't know where we put it in age, but you know, the suburbs are at a place now where people in the suburbs are smart. People in the suburbs can be just as worldly as people in the cities. They can be just as interesting, and it may have been, they probably were 40, 50 years ago as well. It's just these ideas that I think we've had kind of, you know, we watch one TV show, and I'm not saying we think we're experts, but it paints such a picture for us. You know, that's why you hear, you know, that's why women in the suburbs are always, you're always going to hear the Stepford wives come up. Like there's always that comparison. Like we have a very limited number of things to compare other things to. So we use what we can to sort of justify why we don't understand these things. Why we don't understand why people in the suburbs would feel this way about something. Oh, because they're Stepford wives, or they're soccer moms, or they're drunk, you know, madmen, you know, like circa 2002 Don, or 2020 Don Draper, or whatever that would be. You know, these things have kind of stuck around. These stereotypes have stuck around. It's really weird because like the stereotype to me that resonates as somebody who's, you know, I was literally born in just 1980. I am like an 80s baby through and through, but being born in 1980 means I grew up in the 90s. And I remember seeing the Pearl Jam video for Jeremy for the first time. And I was not like the biggest Pearl Jam fan. But I remember just watching it and just being like, holy fuck, I get that, because I feel like I know people like that kid. I've never seen that happen. And then a couple of years later, Columbine happens. And like the kind of, this kind of new kind of stereotype that we are starting to really see become more prevalent in our daily lives is these just like angry, messed up, misogynistic white dudes who do terrible things. And I don't want that to be a stereotype, but it is. And you know, now I'm terrified of that. You know, it's like there's always something to be terrified of. And you know, I don't know if the suburbs are filled with those guys, but I grew up with a lot of them. And you know, I saw this this kid, Kyle Rittenhouse, the Kenosha shooter.
Right.
I know exactly where he's from. He's from Antioch, Illinois, which is like 2 towns away from one of the towns I write about in the book. You know, so it's like I know this. That's to me, those are the stereotypes that I'm focused on now, and they kind of do keep me up. They keep me up at night.
Yeah, I think a lot of sort of what I see as the influence of the suburbs, you know, wasn't apparent to me when I was living there.
Yeah.
But like, you know, I grew up and like a wild number of kids that my brother and I grew up with, like got cancer. And like, maybe it was an environmental thing, but who knows? And, you know, I knew, again, like a seemingly, seemed like a lot of kids whose parents died by suicide, like later.
Yeah,
And,
I knew a bunch of those too.
Yeah, and so again, it's not that these things don't happen everywhere, but it gets back to that idea of the suburbs sort of fronting as something they aren't, rather than just accepting that, you know, people have people have problems everywhere, people struggle everywhere. And, you know, I think with respect to like school shooters, I think a big part of the sort of facade of the suburbs has to do with like codified gender roles. Right. And the idea of what you do if you're a woman in the suburbs, what you do if you're a man. There's no there's no fluidity there. There's no acknowledgement of, sort of other realities. And, we know now that that is a very stifling way to live. But I think there's still this this ideal, this suburban ideal that that makes people feel like they don't fit in if they don't conform.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I felt it as a kid myself. I mean, I understood that perfect. I think I was in a pretty unique position because I don't know. I got to move around a little bit in the suburbs. I didn't have this glamorous life where I was like moving from like one place to the next. I was moving up and down the lake by Chicago.
I mean, it sounded actually very traumatic. Like you were
yeah.
like nomadic at an age when you should not have been nomadic, right?
Yeah, it was hard, but like, I don't know. I mean, this is what I write about in my first book. I'm weird. I thought it was like an adventure, sort of. Like, I'm like, oh, this is fun. I can do this. I mean, it got terrifying pretty fast, pretty messed up, but for the most part, people were really kind and helpful, and I'm here. I'm very happy about that. So I can't really fault the suburbs for. I guess I maybe I can. I don't know. I never really thought about it too much, but my family kind of unraveling and all that kind of stuff. Maybe the suburbs did play a part in that, but at the end of the day, I think when I go to the suburbs, the thing that kind of sticks with me is just how removed, like just how disconnected I am from everything. Like when I'm driving in a car, and this is the luxury, this is, coming from almost my entire adult life has been spent in cities, where I'm constantly just walking around people. But there's something so isolating about being in a car that I think, if me personally, and I don't know how, I'm not speaking to anybody else's experience, but me personally, if I had to like drive in a car every single day for the last 20 years, man, I think I'd be that alone, I think is just for me. So, yeah, puts me in a weird place, but some people can deal with it.
Yeah. So what are some of your sort of favorite pop culture representations of the suburbs, like movies or music or books, basically anything?
Basically anything. There's so many things that I can riff on with this one, but I mean, obviously David Lynch. I've definitely grown up, like my entire, again, something that's been in my life since I was pretty young has been David Lynch, and that probably has not that probably warped me in a lot of ways. Probably has a lot to do with my obsession with like the Pacific Northwest. It's like yeah, that definitely screwed me up a little bit. But I mean, I think I've always been kind of a big fan of 80s hardcore, and I think being able to really kind of write about it in a way that tries. I mean, there's a lot wrong with the hardcore scene. That's a whole other topic, but I think there's also a lot of, I think it's 80s hardcore is this like kind of like really wild, kind of brilliant burst of just mostly, not all, but mostly suburban anger, like suburban white boy anger channeled into something sort of creative, I guess. Not everyone listens to Black Flag or Youth of Today and here's creative, but I do. But that stuff to me is like, I think there's something like really fascinating. It's a very unique American art form, the way that those bands did it. And then the bands that came after them, which is pretty much all of indie rock, same thing. That to me is like a lot of that music is suburban. Indie, like the stuff we consider indie rock now is whatever, but the indie rock that we grew up with,
right. The post-hardcore,
yeah,
indie
college rock or whatever, yeah,
right,
yeah. Like to me, that's just hardcore moved to the cities and got more into art, and
Right, exactly, and disavow the suburbs.
Right. Which I can appreciate both
Yeah.
sides of that.
Right, exactly.
So there's so much. I mean, I've been able to talk about the movie Over the Edge a lot.
Yeah, I was really excited to see that. I love that movie.
Oh my God. Everybody has talked to me about it. I'm like, I am going to single-handedly like bring this movie back into relevancy. And it's such a great movie in so many ways. And, you know, I have my own like warped idea of like, oh, I wish, you know, if I were able to like tell people what the kids should be into, like, yeah, 1619 thing, that's definitely something everyone would be reading. And, you know, but they'd also be watching Over the Edge.
Yeah.
Definitely did me right.
When you were talking about sort of like the sort of consumerism and disposability, that made me think of the Kevin Smith movie Mallrats.
Oh, right.
Which I think has a really incisive critique of that sort of culture. And, you know, it's also an incredibly goofy, profane movie.
Yeah.
But I think it does, like, I think that was one of the first, like that and Grosse Point Blank were
that's a great movie.
The first two movies that I saw that really had a sort of a unifying critique of the culture of consumption and how the suburbs kind of pushes that in all these different ways.
I think Grosse Point Blank. I mean, I like Kevin Smith movies a lot. I actually rewatched Chasing Amy for the first time, and I'm like, I don't know what to think.
That one's a lot for sure.
Yeah, I'm like, I can't. I mean, like, at least we know Ben Affleck's character is definitely dealing with his own shit in some way. But there's just layers and layers of just weirdness. But you know, and Clerks, I think, actually kind of picks up on the like suburban boredness thing kind of perfectly. But Grosse Point Blank, that's a movie that I don't think gets enough credit. I've watched it a dozen times more. I've watched that movie so many times. I think it's Cusack's best movie. I think it's kind of weirdly almost subversive, kind of flipping. It's sort of looking at the John Hughes movies 10 or 15 years later and be like, here's where all these kids ended up, you know, because Grosse Point isn't that far from the North Shore of Chicago. And I remember seeing that for the first time. I'm like, this is like a fucked up John Hughes movie. Like, it's really a great, bizarre, just wonderful film. I have a lot of really good things to say about that one.
Yeah, no, I agree. I love it. And yeah, there's definitely, I mean, I think a lot of it is, you know, it's supposed to be, you know, there are a lot of sight gags that are sort of juxtaposing, you know, this, you know, man in black who's sort of who like in his regular life is always sort of in the shadows and like he cannot hide in Grosse Point for various reasons. But
there's the part where he goes back to where his old house used to be.
Oh my God. And it's an Ultramart.
Yeah. I'm like, and that's such a weird, because I feel like that is a feeling you don't, that does happen in the suburbs, but that to me, like you see that more in the city. Like, oh, that used to be my favorite restaurant and now it's a bank.
Right.
You know, I have experienced that, you know, in the suburbs, and there's something so deflating about that place that was once there that's not there anymore. And something like it throws you off so hard. I mean, I've never killed anybody. I'm not an assassin, so I don't have all that baggage. But you know, going back to Chicago, and I remember going to find this restaurant that I used to go to with my grandpa, and it's not there anymore. It's a parking lot. I was like, wait, where the hell am I? What just happened? That's a really good scene. And the kid playing the video game, he's playing like Mortal Kombat.
Right.
And he's got like the backwards Detroit Red Wings hat. It's very good.
Yeah. And, you know, I mean, one of the reasons I have not been back to the town where I grew up since I left is because I'm not prepared for the prospect of being sad about stuff that, you know, was a big part of my childhood being gone, you know, because I know a lot a lot of like mom and pop places have been replaced by big box stores, and open spaces have been developed, and all that. And Grosse Pointe, like even before I really had words for that thought, that scene in Grosse Pointe Blank really pinpointed it. Although I was like, they must have changed the zoning, because usually usually you can't have a convenience store in a residential neighborhood within like a certain amount of yards.
Especially like a place like Grosse Pointe. I feel like the people would be pretty up in arms about a convenience store. Like Grosse Pointe's a pretty nice place. I feel like they would I don't know, get on their high horses and be like, no, this doesn't go here. Yeah, I don't know. It's a good one, but yeah, I don't know. It's really, because I will go back to Chicago especially, and I talked about the isolation of being in a car, but when I go back home to Chicago, I do like being in a car, because I get to go see all these places that to me kind of existed in sort of like spurts. Like I didn't get to see these places all the time, and if I get in a car, I can go see all these different parts of my life, and it kind of helps me piece it together a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really therapeutic. I feel like we should be taking shots every time I say it.
This is a form of therapy, isn't it?
It is.
Talk therapy.
It all is. Yeah, that's what it is.
I popped back in because you were talking about cars. Do the suburbs exist because of cars? I mean, isn't there something fundamentally like that they are they need access to the city. They don't exist independently. And without the automobile, you wouldn't have that kind of intermediate space.
All these things, I mean, the rise of everybody being able to have a car perfectly coincides with the rise of the suburbs, the rise of the expressway. It's all these, the post-war boom. I mean, if you look at before the wars, I don't think everybody could have a car. And if everybody did have a car, it didn't matter because everything wasn't connected. And then, Eisenhower made sure everyone was connected. And, all these things kind of came up at the same time. And, I think that's kind of the beauty of America. I said all these weird things about it, but I think, we were in our past, and this is, I will also temper this with, it was a lot of time, most of the time, somebody suffered because of this, which is the unfortunate, shitty part of it. But America has always been quick to be like, let's keep expanding and let's keep moving. And, that used to be something we were proud of. And now that's the sprawl. That let's keep expanding, let's keep moving, it's just like we're just putting more stuff up, and that stuff doesn't really, you're in a bookstore. It's like a few years ago, we were like, why do we need another Barnes and Noble? We've got all these great indie bookstores, and now we're seeing that we really might not need Barnes and Noble because we've got the great indie bookstores, and Barnes and Noble is being forced out by an even bigger. It's like it's a whole weird thing. All we need is indie bookstores. I'm pandering a little bit, but this is, my philosophy is very based in going to indie book. Like I develop everything, I am because of places like indie bookstores or mom and pop restaurants where I could just sit and drink coffee until God knows when and not think about anything. I don't want another McDonald's or another Walmart. I want stuff that has soul and stuff that I can understand its existence, and it won't just be, helmed. It won't be managed by some faceless person who will be out next week, and another faceless person will come in, and
Yeah.
That's why I feel like the development in New York City has been so unsettling, because it's almost like it's just taking the parts of the suburbs that everyone claims to hate, like the giant Best Buys and the Bed Bath and Beyond, and just plopping it in the middle of neighborhoods that absolutely did not need them. And yet, you know, I don't know. It's odd. It's
Have you
odd.
seen Hudson Yards? Have you been here for that?
Yes, I have.
That
Yeah.
that nightmare. I mean, I don't know if anybody watching this knows what Hudson Yards is, but it's like they dumped $1 billion into this development, and God knows how many people they probably displaced for it, just like they did with the stadium down the street from me. But that place is a nightmare. It is not made for locals. It is made for tourists from Saudi Arabia, tourists from France, tourists from China. It's not made for people from New York. It's made for people from other countries that have a lot of money. And it's been up 2 years, and they're already articles being like, we need to rally around Hudson Yards. It's like, no, we don't. That place is a terrible drain on New York. Nobody wants that. And if it's, I wrote about how much ruin porn and like those abandoned mall photos kind of weird me out, but I also can't stop looking at them. I would love it if Hudson Yards became an abandoned, just whatever for a little while, and then we figured out how to repurpose it and not make it some like BS luxury mall place. But I just want to see it just suffer a little bit.
That's fair. That's
just a tiny bit. I'm vindictive these days.
Yeah, I'll throw a couple questions from the audience chat at your way. Andy, if you have more to ask, please go ahead, but I'll get a couple of these in here.
No, go ahead with the questions.
Well, I think you're muted.
Sorry, I went mute there for a minute. There we go. How much of the U.S. is suburban? And I guess I'm kind of asking this. I'm thinking anyway as I'm asking this. I grew up in Phoenix, and I grew up 10 minutes from the center of the city, but it was the suburbs.
Arizona and Florida are the two states that I constantly go back to and try to explain to people. I'm like, if you want states that are suburban states, like there's a lot of desert and stuff in Arizona, so there's more, but like the suburbs in Arizona, when I went there, I was like, these are suburbs. And Florida, it's just kind of the same thing, but there's no real, it's kind of still undefined what exactly a suburb is, but technically a suburb is an outlier. So it's what's outside of the metropolitan area. So you could have, I think it's the Denver metropolitan area. So it's Denver in the middle, and then what's around it could be, you could say it's maybe a part of it is still Denver, or it's the suburbs. It's very confusing in a lot of places, but as of the last census, 53% of Americans live in the suburbs. That is what's considered rural, urban, and suburban. 53, like over half of our country lives in the suburbs.
Yeah,
and that's why this is so important to talk about, because
right. Yeah, that wouldn't count people like me who grew up in what was probably not technically a suburban environment, but was definitely attitudinally, culturally a suburban environment. Right. Steven Spielberg, basically in the same ground, who's another kind of poet laureate of the suburbs, or at least the sort of sunshiny version of the suburbs.
For sure.
I mean, he was kind of one of my early influences in this book, because I saw the documentary on him on HBO, and I'm an unabashed Steven Spielberg nerd. I mean, E.T. was like, when I was a kid, was like my favorite, and I'm such a huge Indiana Jones dork. But he said the suburbs were my religion. And I thought that was really, I was like, oh wow, that's deep, Steven Spielberg. But yeah, I mean, I read about places in northern Illinois that are an hour and a half away from Chicago and 2 hours away from Milwaukee that I think like 30 years ago would have been considered the country, but tried to become a suburb. There's plenty of places across America that tried to become suburbs and didn't end up working out. So it's still up in the air, but it's usually what's outside of the city.
Mm-hmm. Here's another one, kind of for both of you, asking, can you talk a little bit sexuality in the suburbs and how it's different from other experiences? Says, as a city kid, predation seemed to have a different tenor, but also issues of access and exploration.
You want to go? You have one, Andy?
Yeah, I mean, I think the suburbs, again, it gets back to the sort of there's a way that the suburbs are sexualized very much around age lines, you know, like we see so much about, you know, adultery in the suburbs in pop culture. And there's also, you know, the idea that the kids being unparented is somehow dangerous. Like somehow, you know, if your parents aren't home after school in the city, that's sort of a given. If your parents aren't home after school in the suburbs, there's something more sinister about it and you have to be protected. And there's this idea of like, you know, just kind of rampant, you know, predation, sexual experimentation at too young an age. I don't know if you guys remember the furor over rainbow parties back in the early 2000s.
Oh my God.
Wow. Which was like, for those of you who don't know, there was this phenomenon of kids like middle school kids wearing these colored rubber bracelets. And it became almost a kind of satanic panic level, you know, freak out among parents about, you know, what these bracelets meant. And, you know, there's a very fevered imagination about what the suburbs allow for in the absence of parents. But to get back to the question, I'm assuming a lot of that has to do with like the sort of compulsory heterosexuality of the suburbs. And, you know, a lot of the friends that I grew up with who did in their adult life come out as queer took a long time to do it. And I think that is something that has absolutely changed in the past couple of decades.
Oh yeah.
Which I think is, you know, that's really important. I think, you know, as a society, as a kind of, again, very plugged in sort of populace, we understand a lot more, and there's been a lot demystified. But absolutely, I mean, I remember at the time just, you know, the fear, you know, the sort of gay panic, especially for boys, that if you didn't conform, you were pegged as gay, you were pegged as different, and that was considered like a negative. And, you know, I don't doubt that really lingers, and that really had an impact on how people experience themselves, and, you know, made leaving the suburbs seem much more urgent than, you know, yeah. So,
you know, something, I mean, it's fascinating to talk about like the kids in the suburbs, like experimenting, you know, that was always something. They were so worried about kids having sex, which is fair, I guess. But I also think it's kind of interesting, like, you know, I go back to the film version of The Ice Storm.
Oh yeah.
And like that whole scene where they're at the key party, and I read a lot of stuff on like swingers in the suburbs, and you know, even today you're still going to find articles on that. And I write a little bit about that.
Oh, you write about the real estate listing.
Yeah, the one in Dungeon, which is the funniest. I mean, so like good. It just blew up on the internet, but it was like, I think it's like 2 million people in a couple of days looked at this Zillow listing. If anybody doesn't know what it is, it's like a very normal McMansion right outside of Philadelphia. it's like one of the, it's like the original, like you start clicking through and you're like, oh, normal house, and then it's just like straight up sex dungeon. And it's,
They also make reference to it in the listing. It's like, there's a naughty twist. Like it's
Yeah.
very sort of like 50 Shades of Grey. Like this is all, you know, this is all above board now.
yeah, brings up a property value.
Yeah.
No, but it's you know, like I think a lot of there was always talk about and there probably still is, but what goes on behind closed doors is a big thing people associate with the suburbs, like what they don't want to talk about. But another thing that is a theme that's always coming up is lack of fulfillment. And I think I go back to that scene in the Ice Age where they're throwing their keys in the bowl, and it just like you could just tell that everybody in there, like the women seem very nervous, but they seem just as unsatisfied with their lives as the men do. Like everyone, but the men are more like kind of like, oh, we're dudes, you know.
But then the sex ends up being terrible, right? I mean,
Awful, yeah. There's literally
really
there's an
like
ice storm happening.
build up, right? There's this
Yeah.
buildup of like, it's a key party. We're going to have fun. It's going to fulfill fantasies. And then it absolutely does not.
Yeah.
And yeah.
I mean, I also, and like, you know, you talking about LGBTQ, I you know, I grew up with a lot of gay and lesbian family members and family friends, and in certain parts of my life, I was in certain parts of my life the only Jewish person I knew, and I was the only person that knew gay people, and it was like people were fucking scared of that in, you know, the late 80s. They were like, you know, a gay person, oh, you know, and that was a thing, and it's that was the suburbs once, and I do think that's definitely changed a lot. It could stand to change more, but they have diversified in a lot of different ways, and that's good, you know. But I remember growing up, and there were a lot of things people were scared of in the suburbs, and I got to experience a few of them. So, yeah.
Well, hopefully this evening has been more fulfilling than life in the suburbs for everybody.
This has been great.
Yeah. Thanks both of you for being here. It's a really great conversation. I don't want to give it all away. Go buy the book, people. You know, read more about it in there.
Yes.
And I'll also throw out a plug to join us next week when we have Pam Houston and Ginger Gaffney here in conversation. That's going to be another great chat. But for now, we'll just say again, thank you to Andy and Jason, and good night, everybody.
Thank you, guys, and everyone stay safe out there.
Yes, thank you. And thanks again for hosting us.
Bye, dog.
All right, my dog knows I'm getting off now, so.
Bye, Andy. Thank you.
Bye.